On the morning of March 3, 1876, the sky over Bath County, Kentucky was perfectly clear. No clouds, no wind, no birds. Then the meat began to fall. For roughly 2 minutes, chunks of raw flesh drifted down from the empty sky, blanketing a field 100 yards long and 50 yards wide. Multiple scientists would examine the remains. They would find tissue from at least 3 different animals. What on earth happened? Bath County sits in the eastern folds of the Appalachian foothills. In 1876, the nearest railroad was a full day's ride away. Lexington lay 35 miles to the west over rough mountain roads. The county's population was thin. Farms scattered across ridges and narrow valleys, separated by miles of forest. No one here expected attention from the wider world. The Crouch homestead sat on an open ridge, surrounded by thin woodland and pasture, open to the wind, open to the sky. Mrs. Allen Crouch was outside that morning making soap. Animal fat rendered in a kettle over an open fire, lye stirred in with a long wooden paddle. Hard, routine work. She had been doing it since dawn. The sky was still. No wind stirred the trees. Then something struck the ground near her feet. A piece of raw flesh, roughly 2 inches square. Before she could make sense of it, more fell. Chunks of meat dropped from the clear sky like large snowflakes. Her own words. They landed on fences, on the ground around the kettle, on the roof of the house. The shower lasted 2 minutes. When it stopped, raw flesh blanketed an area 100 yards long and 50 yards wide. Mrs. Crouch gave the most detailed account. Her young grandson was also in the yard, but it was her testimony that reached the press. By the time neighbors arrived, the pieces lay on the ground, drying in the late winter air. Some chunks were the size of a fingernail. Others stretched 4 inches across. 2 local men picked up pieces of the fallen flesh and ate them. Their verdict: it tasted like venison or perhaps mutton. They could not settle on which. The story reached the press within days. The Louisville Courier-Journal published an account. The New York Times ran a notice on March 9th. Scientific American would follow with a longer piece later that year. Falls of strange material had documented precedents in the 19th century. Fish rain, frog rain, worm rain. But those events always accompanied storms. None had produced identifiable mammalian tissue from a clear sky. Locals had begun preserving the material, some in glycerin, others dried in paper. These specimens were about to travel far from the hollows of Bath County. What scientists found inside those jars made everything harder to explain. The first published analysis came from 2 New York physicians, Allen McLean Hamilton, a specialist in forensic medicine, and J.W.S. Arnold, professor of histology at the University of New York, obtained specimens and examined them together. Their findings were reported in the medical record. The cellular structure was unmistakable. Animal tissue, not fungal growth, not mineral deposit, not cyanobacteria. Flesh. Hamilton identified pulmonary tissue in 2 specimens. Lung, the alveolar structure, tiny air sacs where oxygen crosses into the blood, was unmistakable under magnification. Arnold found striated muscle fiber in 3 others. Skeletal muscle, the tissue that lines the limbs and trunk of any mammal. The banding pattern was clean. 2 remaining specimens yielded hyaline cartilage, smooth, glossy tissue that cushions joints and lines the airways. Dr. A. Mead Edwards, president of the Newark Scientific Association, conducted a separate examination. He received several dried samples and studied them over a period of days. Edwards confirmed what Hamilton and Arnold had found. The material was animal tissue, connective tissue, and what he judged to be cartilage. His results, published in the American Journal of Microscopy, matched their analysis independently. 3 scientists, working independently, examining different specimens. All 3 reached the same conclusion. lung, muscle, and cartilage. A single carcass might yield 1 or 2 tissue types. 3 separate organ systems, respiratory, musculoskeletal, and connective, scattered across the same field in the same 2-minute shower, pointed to something far more complicated than one dead animal falling from the sky. Hamilton went further. He compared the lung tissue against reference samples from known animals. The closest match was horse. Or, he noted carefully, a human infant. Other scientists compared the muscle and cartilage. Muscle fiber consistent with deer, cartilage matching sheep or goat. 3 tissue types, at least 3 species, all from a clear sky, onto the same field in the same 2 minutes. The specimens offered further clues. Witnesses described the meat as fresh-smelling when it fell. Not rotten, not rancid, but raw. Some pieces were thin and dry, others thick and sodden as though exposed to moisture for different lengths of time. Word spread through the farms within hours. By afternoon, neighbors had gathered at the Crouch property, collecting samples in mason jars, tin boxes, paper parcels, whatever they had on hand. The haphazard preservation would frustrate every scientist who later handled the material. Investigators surveyed the Crouch property and the surrounding land. No carcass, no blood trail, no bones, no sign that any animal had been butchered or dismembered within miles. Mrs. Crouch was emphatic on one point. She had seen no birds, no vultures circling, no crows, nothing overhead. The meat had fallen from empty air. That single detail, no birds, became the hinge on which every theory would turn. By spring of 1876, the event had crossed from regional curiosity into national scientific discourse. The American Journal of Microscopy published Edwards's analysis. The Louisville Medical News devoted column space. Letters flew between laboratories, proposing and discarding explanations. The tissue was cataloged. The species identifications were credible. But the mechanism, how organs from multiple animals fell from a clear sky with no carcass and no birds overhead, remained unknown. They had documented the what. Now they needed the why. 3 explanations emerged in the months that followed. Each answered part of the puzzle. None survived intact. The first was botanical. Leopold Brandeis, a chemist from Brooklyn, examined his own set of specimens and declared the material was not animal tissue at all. It was nostoc, a cyanobacterium that forms gelatinous masses on the ground after rain. It can appear suddenly and to an untrained eye might resemble tissue. The problem was elementary. Nostoc is green, translucent, and shapeless. The Kentucky material was red, fibrous, and structurally identifiable as mammalian tissue. Hamilton and Arnold had documented lung alveoli, striated muscle, and cartilage cells. No cyanobacterium produces those structures. The theory collapsed on contact with the evidence. The second theory invoked weather. Tornadoes and waterspouts could lift debris and deposit it elsewhere. Fish and frogs had fallen from storm skies before. But March 3, 1876 was a clear day. No storm system was recorded in the region. Mrs. Crouch described the sky as cloudless. A waterspout requires a storm. The weather theory had no weather to work with. The third and most durable explanation came from Dr. L.D. Castenbein, a physician who published a detailed analysis in the Louisville Medical News. Castenbein pointed to vultures. The behavior he cited was well known. Turkey vultures, when startled or preparing to fly after feeding, eject the contents of their crops. The reflex lightens the body for takeoff. The vomited material is soft, partially digested, and easily scattered. Castenbein's scenario: a large flock had recently scavenged multiple carcasses, horse, deer, sheep. They took flight together, and the collective disgorging produced a concentrated shower of mixed tissue from altitude. The theory was elegant. It accounted for the mixed species, the tissue variety, and the clear sky. A flock at several thousand feet might be invisible from below. For 150 years, this has remained the most widely cited explanation. But the vulture theory carried problems that Kastenbein left unresolved. First, scale. The shower covered roughly 5,000 square yards. Producing that volume would require between 50 and 100 vultures vomiting simultaneously in close formation. No ornithological study has recorded a synchronized mass regurgitation event of that magnitude. Vultures vomit individually, not in concert. Second, visibility. A flock of 50 to 100 birds, even at altitude, would cast shadows and produce sound. Mrs. Crouch reported neither. Third, anatomy. Vultures feed on externally accessible tissue, flank muscle, skin, exposed viscera. They rarely reach the lungs, which sit deep inside the ribcage behind bone and cartilage. Yet 2 specimens were definitively lung. Fourth, dispersal. Material dropped from a spread-out flock at altitude would scatter over hundreds or thousands of yards, thinning at the edges. The Crouch deposit was concentrate, a tight oval, 100 by 50 yards. That pattern suggests a single source at moderate height, not a flock dispersed across open sky. Kastenbein's theory remains the best available explanation. It has never been proven, it has never been refuted. It survives less because it is convincing, and more because nothing better has emerged. And there is one avenue no one has taken. Preserved specimens from the original 1876 event reportedly still exist, at least one in a collection linked to Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky. Modern DNA sequencing could identify the exact species of each sample. The technology is routine. A graduate student with a PCR machine could settle the question in weeks. No one has done it. After a century and a half, the most basic question, what animal did this flesh come from, remains unanswered. Not because the answer is beyond reach, but because no one has reached for it. Some mysteries endure not because evidence is missing, but because the evidence is awkward. The Kentucky meat shower belongs to that category. The physical material was real. 3 qualified scientists working independently confirmed it. The tissue types, lung, muscle, cartilage, have never been seriously disputed. What fell over Bath County on March 3, 1876 was animal flesh. How it arrived remains unknown. The vulture theory is plausible and widely cited, but no one has demonstrated that synchronized mass regurgitation at the required scale occurs in wild vulture populations. No competing theory has fared better. The specimens reportedly still sit in a Kentucky archive. DNA analysis, unimaginable in 1876, is now undergraduate level work. The species question could be resolved in weeks. No one has done it. The case sits in a blind spot between disciplines, too strange for biology, too well documented for folklore, too old for the media cycle. We tend to assume old mysteries persist because tools were primitive or evidence was lost. This case says otherwise. The tools exist. The evidence exists. What is missing is harder to name. The institutional willingness to take something apparently absurd seriously enough to test it. Bath County has not forgotten. Owingsville hosts an annual meat shower festival. In 2026, the event marks its 150th anniversary, a century and a half since flesh fell from a clear sky onto a woman making soap. The anniversary may bring a scientist willing to open one of those jars, or it may pass as the previous 149 have, with the specimens undisturbed. The people of Bath County never needed a laboratory. Mrs. Crouch knew what fell on her. The meat was real. The sky was clear, clear sky, real meat. Everything between those two facts remains an open question. And somewhere in Lexington, the answer may still be sitting in a jar,